Sparkline, Part 2, Interactive. This is part 2 of a two-part video series where we build this interaction on this Sparkline that shows weekly downloads for an NPM package. In part 2, Interactive Sparkline, we will discuss hover interaction with mouse move, bisection to isolate the hovered data point, unidirectional data flow and immutable update patterns, drawing the circle for the hovered point, updating the value text on hover, drawing the vertical line for the hovered point, calculating the hovered time interval, and dynamic text labels based on hover interaction. Okay, now for the truly fun part, which is adding this interaction. Let's add the interaction that NPM has. Just to quickly review what that is, if you go to an NPM package, you can hover like this. And when you hover, it does a bunch of things. It adds a line, a vertical line. It adds a point on that line that intersects with the line of the area chart, and then it updates the count number, and it also updates the dates at the top. So let's make it happen. Okay, time to bust out the hover interaction on mouse move. Okay, so we want to listen for mouse events, namely mouse move events. I suppose we could listen on the SVG itself. And that would look like something like svg.on, mouse move, a function that takes as input the event, and I like the fat arrow syntax myself. And let's see if this works. Console.log event. Okay, we get a mouse event. Now, getting the actual mouse position is notoriously tricky, and D3 has a utility for that. Let me see if I can find that. In the D3 docs, I think it's called pointer, event, and target. Okay, excellent. Let's try this. This should give us really perfect X and Y values based on the mouse event. I'll just paste that, and then let's log X and Y. And we also need to import pointer from D3, which I'll do right there. Okay, so now if I hover, I do get X and Y coordinates. Excellent, excellent. Now the only thing we really need is X, because Y is determined by the data. So let me change this around a little bit and say X is pointer event at index 0. And it increases as we move to the right. Okay, so now what we need to do is isolate the datum that matches where we've hovered. And how do we do that? Now we need bisection to isolate the hovered data point. Well, first we need to get the date that we've hovered on by inverting the scale. And so we can say const date equals x scale dot invert x. And I think that should give us a date. Let's see if that worked. Sure enough, it does. Amazing. All right, that gives us the exact day that we're hovering over, but our data is rounded to the weeks. So how do we get the right one? I think in the past I've seen bisect used for this sort of thing. Using bisect is definitely an option. We could also use D3 time week dot floor on our date and then look up the original datum based on that date. But how would that lookup happen? It's almost like we need a map, and we need to use a date as a key. I don't know. I like the bisection idea because it's general purpose. It'll work for any data. So yeah, let me do that. It'll be more useful, in case we want to use this code for something else in the future. So I'll say to do use bisect to isolate the datum, and I'll see what the AI can do. Yeah, that looks about right. All right, let's import bisector from D3. There it is. And so it's saying, all right, we're going to make a bisector and use dot left. Yeah, because when you bisect, you have to choose, bisection, by the way, is when you have a bunch of values and you want to figure out between which pair of adjacent values is your value. And so do you want the one that's to the left of you or the one that's to the right of you? I think in this case, we want the one that's to the left. I mean, it doesn't really matter. We just want the closest one. So that should be fine. And then we can call that function, passing in the data, our date, and 1. I don't know. I'll have to look up the docs for that. But that should give us the index in the array, and then we just look up the value based on the index. Let me see if that worked. Console.log datum. And now when we hover, sure enough, it worked. Hooray! All right. This is most of the work for the interaction, really. It's just isolating the datum that you're hovering on. But let me check the docs real quick. I want to know what this function argument is. All right, bisecting data, bisector accessor, returns a new bisector using the specified accessor function. Okay, there's bisector right and bisector left. Well, actually, what did our code call? It was the return value from bisector.left called as a function, and it was the third argument. What is this third argument? I don't know. I'm having trouble figuring this out. And, I learned, though, in this documentation that there's a thing called .center, which returns the index of the closest value to x, which is actually what we want. We want to get the closest datum, not the floored one or the ceiling. So let me use .center instead. And that still works. And what if I leave out this 1? Like, what does that even do? Does it do anything? It looks like we don't need it. It looks like it's working just fine without that. Maybe it was an AI hallucination. Okay. Now we have this, and we're ready to move on to the next step, which is showing this datum in the ways that NPM does. Namely, when you hover, you get this vertical line. Let's start there. Let's start with one thing. Or maybe the circle. Let's start with the circle. Why not? There's a little circle there. So let's try to make that happen. Once we know this hovered data point, we need to use unidirectional data flow and this immutable update pattern. The first step towards making that happen is tracking this hovered datum on our state. So I'll call this hovered datum, and then I'm going to actually just call set state, where we use immutable update patterns to set hovered datum on our state. So now we should have state.hovered datum available to us, in which case we can render that as a circle. Okay, now let's draw that circle for the hovered point. So let's see if we can do that down here. All right, it basically worked. Wow. Okay, I just used the AI to do all that. Let's see what it actually did. So svg.selectAllCircle.hover, love it. .data state.hovered datum, okay, perfect. It's an array with a single element. And then class hover is true, yep, so it matches the selector. And then we set cx and cy based on d. Now, this code is checking if d exists, and if it doesn't, it returns null. I don't really like that. I don't really like that at all. I'm going to clean this up a little bit and say hovered datum is coming from our state. And I don't know, it just kind of feels weird to me to put this as the data. So I'm going to say, all right, if there is a hovered datum, let's use an array with a single element. Otherwise, we use empty array, which should remove this circle. And that makes me think, well, we should actually add the event listener. So when we hover off of it, it updates this to be null. But anyway, the cx is going to be x scale of x value of hovered datum. And then we don't need any of that conditional logic because we did that check over here. And then same for y. And then we set the radius to be 9, which seems pretty close. Let's see what it is in NPM. Oh, it's filled in, and it's just a little larger than the line. So let me set fill to be brand colors.dark. And there is no stroke. So now that looks actually very, very similar. Yeah. There it is. Amazing. Okay. When we hover off of it, it should go away. But maybe I'll save that to the last part because we have it essentially working. Maybe now let's update this number. I mean, that's very low-hanging fruit as a thing to do next. Time to update that label text. See, now that we have hover datum, we can use this in the code above, namely this text stuff here, and say, all right, our text to display is, do we have a hover datum? If so, it's going to be format comma of, actually, let me move this in here. It's going to be format comma of y value of something in any case. So let's put it in here. If there is a hover datum, it's going to be hover datum passed into y value. Otherwise, it'll be the last element of our weekly data passed into y value. And that should work. All right, it works. We get the numbers to show up. Check it out. It's working. All right, let's draw the vertical line for the hovered point. Okay, let's move on to the next thing. Maybe draw that vertical line, because in NPM there's a vertical line going all the way from, look, the margin top to margin bottom. Let's put that in there as well. And that'll be pretty much the same pattern as this, but instead of circle, this will be line. And lines in SVG have x1, y1, x2, y2, I believe. So let's put x1 to be the value from the x scale. And actually that should be x2 as well. And then we got y1 and y2. And these should just bring us from the bottom to the top, basically. So y1 will actually be, well, you know what? We've already figured this out in the y scale. So we could just, I don't know, it seems pretty easy to access yscale.domain at index 0 for y1 and then index 1 for y2. And then r is not relevant, and I think we need to set the stroke on a line. There it is. Hooray! But it's problematic. It doesn't. It's not really right. I was a little too lazy on the y's. Let's just think about it like from first principles. So y1 should actually be margin dot top, right? And look at that, a hot reloaded with our state. See, this is the craziest thing. Hot reloading. I love it. If I hover over a specific value and I update the code for y2, for example, to be height minus margin dot bottom, it hot reloads and updates instantly. So it actually got fixed right there. Now let's just make this a little thicker. And I already have a piece of code that sets stroke width, so I'll just grab that and apply that to our line. There we go. That's a little too thick though. See, I can hover over it, and because we're not doing the hover off, I can use hot reloading to preview different values of this thickness. So that looks about right. Okay, sweet. Now we're down to just like 2 more things to do, which is make sure we know when we're no longer hovering over the area chart, and add all the other stuff from the NPM design. Namely, this text here that says weekly downloads, and it changes when you hover. So I think I'll start there, and there's this icon. That's a pretty cool icon. I'm curious what this icon looks like Okay, that's just an SVG icon. So, let me pull that in. Why not? So if I select this group element and then I say copy outer HTML, that should give us this HTML here. So I'll put that as a comment. Now, yeah, I kind of want to just, add this little icon. Why not? So we can say SVG. Well, there's a couple of different ways we could do it. We could just set the inner HTML of an element, or we could use D3. So what is it? A group element with a polygon. Yeah, we already have it like this. So let me just make this happen. I'll say, all right, we're going to have a group element, which is the downloads icon, or I'll just call it icon. Dot join G, and we're just going to want one of these. Set up the class. And then I think with D3 we could just say .html and pass it an HTML string. So I'll put this polygon and make sure we don't have that closing G tag. And there it is. There's a little icon. Now let's just move it around. And this is going to be a part of our text where if we move it, it should all move together. So let me just set up a group element for our text labels. And I'll call that text labels G. And then we can put the icon inside of that. And let's also put this number inside of that. Here it is. So yeah, instead of going on to the SVG, that goes on to text labels G. Okay, this is pretty much working. Now, instead of setting the X and Y on that inner text element, I'm going to set the transform on the parent group element so we can move them all around at the same time. Transform will be translate of, well, let me just put some numbers in here. See what happens. Now the X and Y of our text should be reset to 0, I think. Now we can just move this parent around and the icon moves with it. Yeah, and then we can do the same for that icon group to move these things around. Yeah, so there's our little icon moving all around. So that should go up towards the top. And it's pretty small. And then there needs to be some text, right, that says weekly downloads. And let me grab that color as well. Go back over to GIMP. Paste that image. Zoom into here. Grab that gray. And then in our code, we can call that text light. And I'll just paste that color there. And then we set the fill, kind of like this, to brandcolors.textlight. And this is going to go on our other text, actually, which we haven't created yet. So let me just copy this one, and we can refactor this in a bit to simplify things. I don't know. I don't think we need this text anchor. We can use the defaults. And then the font size, we can pull up that definition to the parent group element. So we just need to put it in one place. Okay, there was a syntax error. I fixed it. Now, we're doing this for two text elements in the same parent, so we need to disambiguate them with classes again. This is going to be the download count. So I'll give this a class of download count. And then for the other one, that can get a class of maybe label. It's going to be this thing here that switches from saying weekly downloads to saying the dates. So what should we call that? Label. I'll just call a label. Okay, let's see what we've got. Got some errors. Cannot read properties of undefined. That's not good. Is there something accessing hovered datum? Yeah, there it is. I think this is the bug where it's hovered datum is undefined, but it's being passed in here. So I think the thing to do is this, where we make that the datum, and we can say D goes to like this. I think that should fix our error, which happens before you've hovered over anything. That same error is there. Oh, here it is. Oh, yeah, it's right there. It's the same thing. It's the same kind of a pattern with the lines. So let me just do the same kind of a treatment. This way, the function, like, it won't attempt to evaluate this code unless there is a hovered datum. The problem before is that it's setting x2 to be a constant, and it's always evaluating this code, even if hovered datum is undefined. This is one way to solve that. Okay, well, we're almost there. We just need to add that text label. So the text of this label should start out saying weekly downloads. Okay, this is the one that's I don't see showing up. Oh, it's probably because there's a wacky translate going on. No. Okay, this is the parent group element that contains all of our text labels. Sorry, I wasn't thinking straight when I put this there. That's not right at all. Okay, that's the parent group element. Now there's the download count, and there's the text label, and instead of text to display, this one should be weekly downloads, and there it is. And now we can make these positioned a little differently. I think I'll just use the Y attribute to move one of them down a little bit. And then in NPM, I wonder, are those the same text size? I think that's a little smaller. That looks a little smaller to me. So I'll put the font size on this one, and I'll format it like this so I can drag this and change it around. Okay, that looks about right. And the icon, I don't know, the icon is not scaled properly, because in this example, oh, there we go. That's a nice way to scale it up pretty easily. So I'll just put this right in the corner. Well, it should be next to where it says weekly downloads, and then we need to move weekly downloads over to the right a little bit. So for that, I will set the X attribute to be like 10, or tweak that to position it properly. There we go. And then that icon really should be filled in with brand colors text light. So I wonder if I set that on the group element. Oh, it does work. It does propagate through. See? That's nice. Okay, now we just need to move this so that it lines up, and we're pretty much done. And that lies in the translate of the text labels G element. So we got X and Y. I'll just tweak the Y so that it lines up. And there we go. I mean, that's pretty much it, right? That's pretty much it. Let's see NPM. I mean, that's pretty darn close. Oh, we need to have that show the date range when you hover. That's the last remaining item. And actually that text goes over, it could potentially go over that line chart. So we need to move it a little bit more up. Yeah, and then I'll just bring this one down. Okay, so if we have a hovered datum, that weekly downloads text should show the date range, which is going to be 1 week of time. So there's weekly downloads. We can have another version of text to display. And now I'm questioning that variable name. I'll call this download count text. That way it's consistent with the classes. And then we can introduce another thing down here called label text. And then I have to upload that one reference of it right there. So now we have label text, and that's going to come down here. And this weekly downloads text will be the case where there is no hovered datum. So I'll comment out that old stuff for now and say, yo, is there a hovered datum? If so, we want to render, min to max kind of a thing. Otherwise, that's when we render weekly downloads. Now we need to calculate the hovered time interval. Now we just need to figure out this min-max text. And that's going to be based on the hovered datum. So hovered datum dot, the x value, right? That's the date, so x value of hovered datum. And when we run that, it just shows us that date. So it's getting there. We just need to format that date. And for the date formatting, we can use just the same approaches we did for the parsing. So I'll say format date is time format of the same exact specifier. And time format we need to import from D3. Yeah, I'll just put it at the bottom. So now we can say format date of that date. Here it is. Label text is, let's just add a format date right here. There it is. Now, to figure out the max, we just need to add 1 week to that, which should be pretty straightforward. So I'll replace that string max with the same thing. Now they are the same. And then we just need to offset this by a week, which I think we can do with time week dot something dot offset. Yeah, this is it, interval dot offset. So we could do time week dot offset, pass in our date, and say, all right, give me 1 week later. So step would be 1. So there it is, time week dot offset, and we pass in this date here, and then we say the offset is 1. And that seems to have worked. See, if you look at the numbers now, it's 702 to 709. Those are 7 days apart, and it's updating. Amazing. So now the very last remaining item is to quote unquote unhover when our mouse goes outside of that area. And that's where we used pointer. We got X and Y. And now that I think of it, I think we're going to want access to Y. So I'll bring back this other destructuring syntax. And so I think the easiest way to do this is probably to just check if it is inside the bounds of our margin. So let's say check if the coordinates are within our margin. And this is where the AI would probably be pretty good. Yeah, that looks about right. X is greater than or equal to margin.left, and all these various comparisons. Okay, so if it is, let me just say if it is in the margin, then we do something. Else, we do all this other stuff that we were doing before. And you know what might be the easiest way to do this is just to say let hovered datum is null. And if it is in the margin, that's when we want to do this stuff here. And then we can assign hovered datum to be that. And then we don't even need an else. And in either case, we set state to that hovered datum. which is null if we're outside the margin. So that should work. Let me see if that works. We're hovering inside the margin, then when we go outside the margin, all right, it resets. Perfect. Top, bottom, left, right, it works. It works. Amazing. Amazing. This is how you do dynamic text based on the hover interaction. And you could finesse it and get the layout exactly perfect, but this is basically how to recreate this interactive line chart from NPM. Oh, I'm so glad I got it working. Any questions? Awesome in the YouTube chat. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, that concludes Sparkline Part 2 Interactive. Thank you so much for watching. Take care.